What if I told you the story of the world's first city wasn't about ambition, but about redemption? Stay with me as we uncover the untold stories of Ain and Azra, the forgotten architects of our shared humanity, and you'll see why their struggles are still shaping us today. In the beginning, when Adam and Eve left Eden, the world they encountered was untamed and vast. Amid this unfamiliar wilderness, they raised their children. The first generations, led by Cain and Seth, are well known, but the daughters were equally significant. The eldest daughter, Ain, was the caretaker of her siblings and a figure of resilience. Her name was whispered in ancient tales as both wife and sister to Cain. These tales speak of her standing by Cain after his exile, helping him build the city of Enoch. Yet, Ain's own struggles and strength in the face of her brother's dark legacy are rarely explored. She was the architect of community in their chaotic new world, a builder of connections amid division. Ain's role expanded beyond the practical. In shadowy corners of the nascent city, she imparted knowledge of survival, farming, weaving, and governance. When her brother's guilt consumed him, she became the voice of calm. Her children carried this legacy forward, their lives shaped by her teachings. As time passed, Cain named the city Enoch after his son, but it was Ain who forged its soul. The city became a refuge, not just for Cain's descendants, but for all who wandered into its walls. Ain's whispers of forgiveness and endurance became part of Enoch's foundation. Far away, Seth's lineage began to unfold with his sister wife Azra. Where Ain sought community, Azra sought divine connection. Her union with Seth was born not of convenience, but of shared purpose to preserve the righteousness lost after Abel's death. Azra was a figure of mourning and resilience. She built altars with Seth, her prayers rising to the heavens. When she bore her first son, Enos, her joy was tempered by the knowledge of the burden he would carry. Theirs was a lineage destined to reconnect humanity with the divine, and Azra dedicated her life to this sacred mission. Azra's childbirth was marked by divine omens. As Enos took his first breath, a comet streaked across the sky, a sign of the restoration Seth and Azra hoped to bring. The community rejoiced. Enos grew to embody his lineage's spiritual fervor, often seen praying by the streams and under the stars. Azra watched him with pride, teaching him the stories of their ancestors. She reminded him of Abel, the brother they mourned, and the divine justice they awaited. Enos's reverence became the foundation of worship for future generations. As the years passed, the city of Enoch grew, but tensions arose. The descendants of Cain, shaped by their patriarch's past, grappled with guilt and ambition. Ain worked tirelessly to mend divides, but the city became a reflection of its founder, brilliant yet fractured. Among Cain's children, there were those who sought power over peace. Ain became a beacon for those who believed in unity. Her efforts laid the groundwork for a lasting legacy, but the city's splintering hinted at struggles yet to come. The elders of Enoch gathered frequently, debating the city's future. Ain, now older and wearier, mediated these discussions with wisdom. She reminded them of their shared ancestry and the fragility of their existence. Yet, whispers of rebellion persisted. Younger generations, unburdened by the memories of Eden, sought their own path. Among them, Enoch, Cain's son, emerged as a leader. His vision for the city clashed with Ain's ideals, fostering tension. In one heated debate, Enoch declared his intention to expand the city's influence, a vision of power that Ain feared would lead to ruin. Cain, now an aging figure, lived in solitude at the city's edge. The murder of Abel haunted him still, and he shunned the city's politics. Ain visited him often, seeking counsel. In one poignant moment, she asked, "Do you regret the city you built?" Cain, gazing into the distant hills, replied, "It was never the city, it was my heart that faltered." He warned Ain of the dangers of ambition unchecked, urging her to guide Enoch away from the path of destruction. This advice weighed heavily on her as she returned to the fractious city. In Seth's camp, Azra experienced a divine vision. In a dream, a voice told her of a coming flood that would cleanse the earth of its wickedness. The vision terrified her, but she knew it was her duty to prepare her descendants for this fate. Seth listened intently as she recounted the vision. Together, they resolved to teach their children the ways of righteousness, ensuring their lineage would endure. Enos, now a young man, became the focus of their efforts, his faith a beacon for those around him. Back in Enoch, Enoch's ambition began to take shape. He sent emissaries to neighboring tribes, inviting them to trade and settle in the city. While this brought prosperity, it also brought conflict. The newcomers clashed with the city's original inhabitants, and factions formed. Ain saw the city's unity unraveling. One night, she confronted Enoch. "You seek to build a tower to the heavens, but your foundation is fractured," she warned. Enoch dismissed her concerns, claiming that progress demanded sacrifice. This growing rift marked the beginning of Enoch's decline. Meanwhile, Enos began to gather followers in Seth's camp. He taught them to worship God through prayer and offerings, reviving the traditions of their ancestors. His gatherings became a source of hope and inspiration, attracting families from across the land. Azra watched with pride as her son carried forward her vision. Yet, she warned him of the challenges that lay ahead. "Faith without action is fleeting," she said. Enos took these words to heart, organizing his community to build altars and cultivate the land. They became a shining example of harmony and devotion. Enos's growing influence reached the ears of emissaries traveling between Seth's camp and the city of Enoch. News of his spiritual leadership piqued Enoch's interest. Why do they seek guidance elsewhere? Enoch asked his council. His advisors, keen to secure dominance, suggested that Enos's rising reputation threatened the city's authority. Meanwhile, Ain urged Enoch to see the greater picture. "This is not a rivalry, it is a call for reflection," she told him. But Enoch, already consumed by his vision of a mighty city, could not heed the wisdom of restraint. His ambition deepened, setting him on a path of conflict. One evening, a lone traveler arrived in Seth's camp, bearing a message from Enoch. He requested a meeting with Enos, citing mutual interest in uniting their peoples. Azra and Seth were skeptical, but Enos, ever hopeful for reconciliation, agreed to the meeting. Before he departed, Azra pulled him aside. "Do not forget your mission," she warned, her voice heavy with foreboding. Enos reassured her, believing in the possibility of peace. He journeyed to Enoch, accompanied by a small group of followers, unaware of the hidden dangers that awaited. Enos and his group were welcomed into the city with cautious hospitality. Enoch met him in a grand hall, adorned with symbols of power and prosperity. The conversation began cordially, with Enoch praising Enos's spiritual leadership. But as the discussion unfolded, it became clear that Enoch sought to co-opt Enos's influence for his own gain. "Your prayers inspire many. Imagine what we could achieve together," Enoch said, his tone veiling an ultimatum. Enos, sensing the underlying tension, refused to align with Enoch's ambitions. The meeting ended on a strained note, with a storm brewing in both men's hearts. Upon Enos's return to Seth's camp, he shared his concerns. "Enoch is consumed by power, his vision is not aligned with ours," he told Azra. In Enoch, the council urged Enoch to take decisive action. "If they will not join us willingly, we must compel them," they said. Meanwhile, Ain watched her nephew's descent into hubris with despair. She sought Cain's advice again, but his warnings had grown cryptic. "Power is a serpent that coils tighter with each grasp," he said. Feeling powerless, Ain resolved to prevent a conflict that would tear apart their fragile world. Enos's refusal to align with Enoch led to increased tensions between their peoples. Trade between Seth's camp and Enoch began to falter, and disputes arose along shared borders. In Enoch, factions divided over how to handle the situation. Some supported Enoch's aggressive stance, while others, led by Ain, called for diplomacy. The city itself began to reflect these divisions, with its once united populace splintering into camps, Enoch's frustration grew, and he resolved to act decisively. Meanwhile, Azra and Seth prepared their community for the possibility of conflict, bolstering their defenses and doubling down on their spiritual resolve. Ain and Azra lived in a world of fractured families and fragile alliances. But here's the big question. If you were in their shoes, would you choose unity or survival? Let me know in the comments which path you'd take and why. As the rift widened, Ain took it upon herself to visit Seth's camp. Her journey was long and fraught with danger, but she was determined to prevent a greater conflict. Upon arriving, she was met with suspicion, but Enos welcomed her. Over a firelit gathering, she spoke passionately about the ties that bound their families. "We are born of the same roots, and our divisions dishonor our shared origin," she pleaded. Azra, moved by Ain's sincerity, suggested a gathering of elders from both sides. Enos agreed, though Seth remained wary. Hope flickered briefly, but its survival was uncertain. The proposed meeting between Enoch and Seth's elders took place in a neutral valley. Both sides brought their leaders and warriors, a clear sign of mistrust. Ain mediated, speaking of unity and the dangers of pride. Enos, calm and deliberate, echoed her sentiments. But Enoch's impatience boiled over. "Words will not mend what is already broken," he declared, accusing Seth's lineage of undermining his city. The meeting dissolved into heated arguments. As dusk fell, both sides left, further entrenched in their divisions. Ain's dream of reconciliation began to fade. In the weeks that followed, preparations for conflict began on both sides. In Enoch's advisors strategized ways to dominate Seth's camp, viewing it as an obstacle to expansion. In Seth's camp, Azra and Enos led efforts to fortify their defenses, relying on faith and unity to guide their actions. Ain, torn between the two worlds, sought Cain once more. "You must act," she implored. But Cain, now feeble and withdrawn, only muttered, "The seeds of destruction are sown. I cannot unmake them." Ain left in despair, her hope dwindling as tensions reached a boiling point. The first clash occurred near a contested river. Scouts from Seth's camp encountered Enoch's guards building a barricade. Words quickly turned to violence as spears and stones flew. When news of the skirmish reached both camps, the reaction was swift. Enoch used it as justification to rally his forces, while Seth urged restraint, though many of his followers demanded retaliation. Enos prayed for guidance, his voice carrying over the camp. Meanwhile, Azra prepared to defend her people, balancing faith with the grim reality of survival. Enoch's forces began to amass. His fiery speeches roused the city's youth, filling them with visions of conquest and destiny. Ain watched helplessly as the city she helped build prepared for war. She pleaded with Enoch one last time. "You are leading us to ruin," she said. But Enoch, blinded by ambition, dismissed her as a relic of the past. Meanwhile, in Seth's camp, Azra and Enos prepared for the worst. They strengthened their spiritual resolve, believing that faith would guide them through the darkness. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shape their descendants forever. As the city of Enoch prepared for war, Ain made one last desperate attempt to sway Enoch. She gathered the elders who still believed in peace and proposed an intervention. "We cannot let pride destroy what we've built," she said. They agreed to send envoys to Seth's camp under Ain's leadership. However, Enoch discovered the plan and confronted Ain. "You betray your own," he accused, his voice shaking with anger. Ain stood firm. "This city was built on unity, not conquest," she replied. Enraged, Enoch exiled her from the city, severing the last thread of diplomacy. The armies of Enoch marched to Seth's camp at dawn. The clash was brutal and chaotic, with neither side gaining a clear advantage. Ain, watching from a distant hill, wept as she saw friends and family torn apart by conflict. In the midst of the battle, Enos stood firm, rallying his people with words of faith. "We fight not for power, but for survival and truth," he declared. The day ended in a stalemate. But the damage was done. Both sides suffered heavy losses, and the seeds of enmity were sown even deeper. In the wake of the battle, both camps retreated to mourn their dead. Ain wandered through the battlefield, her heart heavy with grief. She found Cain's hut abandoned, a sign that he had fled to escape the consequences of his lineage's strife. In Seth's camp, Azra and Enos tended to the wounded, their faith tested by the horrors they had witnessed. "Our path is clear," Enos said to Azra. "We must rebuild, not through war, but through devotion." This conviction planted the seeds of a movement that would transcend generations. Back in Enoch, the city descended into turmoil. Enoch's failure to secure victory led to dissent among his followers. The council fractured, with some calling for peace and others urging a renewed assault. Enoch became increasingly isolated, his ambition turning to paranoia. "They conspire against me," he muttered, pacing his chamber. Ain, now living as an exile outside the city, began gathering those disillusioned with Enoch's rule. She offered them a vision of reconciliation, hoping to counteract the growing chaos within the city walls. One night, Azra received another vision. She saw a great flood sweeping the land, cleansing it of the strife and sin that had taken root. In her vision, only those who followed the righteous path would be spared. She awoke trembling, knowing she had to act. Azra and Enos gathered their community and began building a sanctuary, guided by divine inspiration. They called on others to join them, spreading a message of renewal and hope. The camp became a place of refuge, drawing families fleeing the violence of Enoch's regime. Enoch's paranoia reached its peak as rebellion brewed within his city. His once loyal followers turned against him, blaming him for their suffering. In a final act of desperation, Enoch declared himself a god, demanding absolute loyalty. This blasphemy drove many away, including some of his most trusted advisors. The city, now fractured, descended into anarchy. Ain and her growing group of followers watched from afar, their sorrow mixed with relief as Enoch's reign crumbled under its own weight. Alone in the ruins of his once thriving city, Enoch wandered through the smoldering streets. His followers had abandoned him, and the echoes of rebellion haunted his mind. He climbed to the highest remaining tower, gazing over the desolation he had wrought. "Was I not chosen to lead?" he cried to the heavens, but no answer came. In his despair, he saw the distant lights of Seth's sanctuary and realized his ambition had consumed the unity his family had once shared. He sank to his knees, overcome with guilt and regret. Meanwhile, Seth's sanctuary flourished as families seeking peace arrived daily. Azra and Enos continued to lead with wisdom and faith, welcoming all who sought refuge. Ain, now a revered figure among the exiles, worked alongside them to rebuild trust among the divided descendants of Adam and Eve. One night, Azra shared her vision of the flood with the community. "We must prepare, not for war, but for renewal," she declared. Inspired by her words, the sanctuary became a place of shared purpose, where the seeds of a new future were sown. Enoch, broken and humbled, arrived at Seth's sanctuary. His appearance sparked fear and anger among the refugees, but Ain stepped forward to meet him. "You are not beyond redemption," she said, embracing him despite his past actions. Azra and Enos agreed to let him stay, provided he renounced his ways and sought atonement. Over time, Enoch worked alongside the others, his strength and cunning now directed toward rebuilding. Though he would never fully escape the shadow of his deeds, he found solace in contributing to a greater good. Years passed, and the sanctuary grew into a thriving community, bound by faith and shared purpose. The descendants of Cain and Seth lived side by side, their old divisions forgotten. Azra and Enos continued to lead with wisdom, while Ain became a symbol of reconciliation. As her life drew to a close, Ain reflected on her journey. "We are all children of Adam and Eve, bound by the same breath of life," she said. Her words became a guiding principle for the generations that followed. The sanctuary endured, a testament to unity and renewal. as the world around it prepared for the Great Flood. This story of Ain, Azra, and the city of Enoch is more than ancient history. It's a mirror to our world today. If this story inspired you or made you think, hit like, subscribe for more untold histories, and share your thoughts below. Let's keep the conversation going.